All right, everybody, welcome to Freelancer School. I am Mike Volkin, owner of Freelancer Masterclass. Today, we're joined with Matt Baker. He's a Senior Vice President of Corporate Development and International at FreshBooks, which is a cloud accounting software solution for small business owners and self-employed professionals. And prior to FreshBooks, Matt was an engagement manager at McKinsey Company and a Senior Strategist at Google. So certainly a great guest to have for this show. Welcome, Matt, to the Freelancer School.
Thanks, Mike. Excited to be here.
So your specialty, I mean, you've got probably a lot of specialties, but the reason why I brought you on the show is to talk about cash flow and how freelancers and solopreneurs can manage their cash, because a lot of them have come from the corporate environment and they're not used to managing client money. They might have been in charge of a budget for a department maybe, but now they've got multiple cash flow. You know, they might have one from one client and paying from PayPal and another client paying from FreshBooks or QuickBooks or something. So tell me, what's the best way for one of our freelancers or solopreneurs to manage their cash?
Well, it's a great question, and it's sometimes even hard to know where to start. I mean, I think we should start sometimes with just acknowledging that a small business owner has to wear all the hats in the business, and so juggling all that is pretty tough. And so, you know, in a large company, you often hire someone whose specialty is ensuring that, you know, the cash flow is there and that your accounts receivable and your accounts payable are managed and such. And so, as the owner, you want to do that in the most efficient way as possible, because you really want to focus on running your business and not, you know, chasing down cash flow and all the rest. So,
Right.
you know, certainly it's worth just recognizing that it's not a full-time job, but it's, you know, an important part of the business. And certainly running out of money is the one thing that's going to lead to, you know, the struggles of, you know, sustainable self-employment. And
Yeah,
so,
that's, yeah.
anyhow, yeah, just to jump in, I guess, on a couple things, you know, ultimately, you know, cash flow is sometimes, you know, considered sort of a finance phrase, but really it's about, you know, do you have enough money in the bank that you can always support your business? And you know, and if you think about it that way, it's just an equation. If your bank statement is your single ledger accounting, you know, what are the things you got to do to make sure that, you know, that balance grows over time? And so the easiest way I like to think about it in talking with small business owners is, how do I increase what's coming in, but also pull it forward?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do I think about decreasing or better spending what's going out, or pushing it out a little bit? And
Yeah.
so, you know, certainly one of the best tools is just looking historically to understand your business and see where you've had those peaks and valleys. I think one of the biggest challenges in being self-employed and being a freelancer is that your income is generally lumpy.
Mm-hmm.
I like this phrase because you can kind of visualize the lumpiness of it. But traditional jobs are, you know, they're meant to give you stable income. They, you know, they pay you twice a month. They make sure your taxes come out first. I mean, they're just doing all they can. Even teachers, for instance, my understanding is most have an option. They can get paid in the 9 months they work, or they can spread it out over 12 months if they choose. And most choose the 12 months because they want the stability
Sure.
and not have to figure out, oh, I spent too much and now I'm going to have to, you
Yeah.
know, eat in every night in the summertime or something like that. So anyway, the point is, it's so lumpy. And so looking back, you can see what drives some of that lumpiness, and you can start to forecast a little bit. So you might have a seasonal business, in which case, you know, when you're going to get the bulk of your income. You might know what your biggest expenses are and how do those, you know, work. If it's just recurring, you know, recurring expenses, you know, then you can plan a little better. But, you know, and luckily, by the way, a lot of freelancers don't have to invest in real estate to get their business going and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. So that can make it a little
That's
easier.
true.
But anyhow, the look back there is so important, just to understand the business. And then maybe just a couple tactical things. One would be just when I mentioned pulling forward. One of the ways to think about that is, you know, there's this whole sort of feeling of, I'm going to do a big project and then I'm going to get, you know, this big chunk of money at the end. And let's say it's a 3-month project and it's a great client. All of that sounds good, but that means you're going 3 months before you hit payday. And
Mm-hmm.
so some of the things you can do is, you know, try to collect a deposit up front if that arrangement works with your client, or break it into milestone-based payments so that, you know, you're getting, you know, a monthly fee as opposed to waiting to the end. And those are just little tips so that the money comes in earlier, which allows you to pay more going out. And it only gets a little bit more complicated, of course, if you have employees or contractors. And so that ultimately, you know, is how I think about just, you know, managing cash flow to feel like you're in control.
Yeah, those are good tips. Now, one of the problems that a lot of my freelancer students have is they like, oh, it's tax time. I don't have the money. What do you mean you don't have the money? You didn't save? Like, how do they save? Like, what do you do when you get $1,000 from a client? Like, do you just put $1,000 in your checking account and use that as a payday or to build your business? Like, what I'll tell you what I personally do, and you can tell me if there's a better option. Every week, I set aside a time on my calendar for bank account management, and it sounds boring, but what I do is I take all the incoming deposits, I total them up, and I take 30% and I transfer it to a savings account. And that savings account is not to be touched. It's for tax time only. Maybe you can tell me there might be another way to do that, but
Yeah. Well, Mike, by the way, I think that's a fantastic way of doing it. Frankly, it's just, in my mind, it's just a matter of having a process that you can stick to. That's going to be the biggest, enabler for you to stay consistent with it. So just getting started and just finding some process is a great way to get started. And I think, the pain point that I've seen that, is the hardest one to, to sort of deal with when you're trying to sympathize with others is this idea that you get to tax time and you've spent it. You've spent more than you were supposed to. And now you got to take out a line of credit or find some capital to pay taxes. And then you sort of fall into that cycle again. So you definitely want to avoid that. I think the 30% rule is a great way to do it. Just pulling it out. And, back to what I was mentioning before, when you have a job, your employer does it for you. So in a lot of ways, we, as adults, we have a lot of people doing stuff for us when we have an employer that you take for granted. And
yes.
Once you become, self-employed, it's all on you. Back to this idea of wearing all the hats. So I think the 30%, don't even consider it your money, just consider it the government's money. So if you really needed that money, then you just got to charge 30% more. And that's the only way you're going to get it. And then you can take the 30% out and put it somewhere else. So I think that's absolutely, best practice around getting it out there. And then the other thing I'll mention that, always strikes me as interesting is that, freelancers as a group generally blend personal and business life together.
Mm-hmm.
You might have one bank account for both. You might have one way that, one calendar where you're managing your personal events and your, business events. And so it's an intermingling there. And I think part of the insight that I have that's interesting is, business growth is personal growth for a lot of freelancers. And so you're sort of up and down depending on how your business is doing. If your clients are happy, you're excited about that. Or if you have enough new deals coming in, you're excited about that. But, the day your client is upset, hey, it's going to upset you too. So you're kind of intertwined with business. And so one of the things, just in addition to saving, is to think about separating, at least from like a bank account perspective, your personal account with your business account. And then once you start that process, it becomes a little easier to take out the 30%, pay other things out of that account, and then maybe pay yourself out of that account with what's left over. And you just get a little bit more structure to try to get ahead of it. Otherwise, I find, when you're just staring at the bank account balance, it can be really misleading if it has a lot of personal expenses in there, especially if, your biggest expense might be your personal mortgage or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do a charity remainder. So anything else I have at the end of the quarterly taxes, I round off and give to charity, whether it's a couple hundred or a couple thousand. I always, 30%, I'm in California. I think maybe other people in the US or Texas, they don't have to save quite 30%, but it's on the high side. So regarding FreshBooks, you're the senior vice president of corporate development there, correct?
That's right.
And the average, I would say the ideal client for FreshBooks would be the solopreneurs, the freelancers and consultants.
Yeah, certainly. We started as a company in the online invoicing space, and since then we've added, several sort of features and value that rounds that out. But ultimately, if you need to invoice to get paid, FreshBooks is a super simple and easy platform to do that, and it's a great graduation from people who are using Word or Excel to create templates, or trying manually to tell people, hey, pay me at this, PayPal, or here's my email address, email the money to me. It becomes really hard to track and keep all of that in one place. So if you use a system like FreshBooks, it makes it easy to invoice, and then we'll keep track of whether you got paid or not, or we'll send follow-ups on your behalf so that you can track down the funds that you're looking for. Because, by the way, getting the invoice out the door is step one, but most invoices are paid late. For a lot of freelancers. So, you got to have a system in place that, to help you bring that money forward. And that's part of the cash flow the cash flow
Yeah.
struggle.
Yeah, I think it'd be a cool feature for FreshBook. If the invoice is overdue, then every time the client touches their computer, it zaps them like with electricity or something. Is that
That's
possible?
right. That's
So,
an R&D. That's an R&D. We're working on
yeah,
it.
yeah. In terms of FreshBooks, so do you guys hire freelancers and consultants there, or is it all employee based, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we have around 400 employees,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'll do certain functions in-house, and then we'll use lots of freelancers to augment that. And so, in my experience at FreshBooks, I've hired at least a dozen freelancers in one way or another to help with things from content to photography to
Cool.
public relations, and a lot of it tends to be in the creative space.
Yeah,
Just simply because that's where my focus area has been. But it's a great way to stay close to the customer too, and you see
that's
who's
what I was
using
going to say.
FreshBooks, and
Yeah.
and understand some of the pain points. Because I think one of the hardest things sometimes is to be an employee, but try to put yourself in the shoes of a small business owner, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why I spend a lot of time just trying to be in the field talking to small business owners, because that's where I get the insights to
Yeah.
understand if some of the tactics that I can communicate from a money standpoint or financial standpoint, to see if they're actually solvable on the ground level. Because
Yep.
like I said, people are just so busy with with the regular business that everything financial seems to be an added burden.
Right. That's where I was going with that line of questioning. If you guys hired freelancers, so for all the freelancers listening, this is the ideal client you want to get hired with. So tell me about Matt, how you would go about hiring a freelancer. How do you identify when you need to hire a freelancer versus an employee or a consultant? And then how do you determine, like, where do you go to find them? And then how do you hire them? That whole process that goes on.
Yeah, well, certainly. So on our side, I guess just to make sure we're sort of staying on the same page, our software is available for anybody who's a freelancer to use, and they can
Mm-hmm.
work with anyone they want. But
Yes.
if I just bring it back to me personally and how I think about hiring, my own freelancers, there's the process I would use when I have, personal work to get done, like, if I need somebody to repair the roof on my house or something like that, there's a way that you go about finding someone for that. And then also on a more, work-related level, there's a process that we use internally to find folks. And
Yeah.
and frankly, where it starts a lot of time is word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
You meet one photographer who leads you to the next, or you meet
Okay.
one graphic designer who leads to the next, and a lot of times that's exactly how we build it out. Ask some of my colleagues, hey, do you know somebody that does this type of work?
Interesting. Okay.
And anyway, and by the way, we do an annual survey of freelancers, small business owners. So it can be with or without employees, but we survey thousands of people once a year for sort of an annual study. And
Okay.
and one of the things that we ask them is, what are your marketing tactics, and which ones are really working?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fascinating thing, because word of mouth continues to be the most effective way for people to grow their business. It's just getting out there and talking to people, and you got to take the time to do it. Whereas what we found in that particular bit of research is that things like social media become something that everyone feels like they got to do, but they're not necessarily the expert. And then so they're stuck spending time on it, but they're not getting the returns from it.
Mm-hmm.
And it creates this space where it's not the best way for them to prospect. But
Yeah.
anyhow, back to
Oh.
us. So we try word of mouth. We also use online platforms. I mean, there's certainly places like Upwork is an example of a place where there's folks that you can find. It's just sometimes hard to do the vetting, and so it
Mm-hmm.
starts a little easier if you have you have word of mouth. And we also, by the way, for what it's worth, look into our customer base. So when you have so many people that are freelancers on the platform, it's a great way to find somebody who you can just do a search, in some ways, to see if there's a customer that could help us out. And then it's a win-win.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So
Use your
that's
customer base. Might as well, because they know your product, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, that's great. So, we've been talking about from a freelance perspective, how to get clients. And I just want all my freelancers to understand, all my audience, is like, it's not all about the freelancer platform, Upwork, where you can you get a client who automatically needs work. It's about creating relationships and partners with fellow photographers or fellow creatives to get work with a bigger company like FreshBooks would be fantastic. It's great to add that to your resume. So how can our audience learn more about you and learn more about FreshBooks?
Well, great for asking. And by the way, I agree with you. Just to hit that final point, your ability to prospect, your ability to go out and find a customer of your own, to me, is the number one thing that you should think about doing to have a long-term business. The platforms that exist that help you find a client, whether it's an Upwork or let's say it's Uber and you're driving because they found it, but those platforms platforms tend to, over time, own the customer relationship
Mm-hmm.
and set the price. And so your ability to go out and find somebody, to me, is, anyway, bar none, the most
That's
important
true.
long term.
Very good point. Yeah.
And so anyhow, freshbooks.com is a great place to go. You can see what we do. You can have a free trial. And that's where we also publish all of our data, where we do those big studies and we look at some of the trends and the mindsets. And we split it by, generation and gender and a lot of other, and vertical, and just a lot of other ways that hopefully provides insights to business owners, even just to know if I'm charging the right price. And then, anyway, for me personally as well, at M. Bakerson on Twitter, I'm available at any point to chat with folks. And I just, like I said, I enjoy spending my time in the market because it's the only way to stay close to our target customers.
Yeah, well, it sounds good. Well, I hope my audience has enjoyed Matt Baker and how to iron out the lumpiness. Thanks so much for joining us, Matt. And hopefully we can have you on soon for some other discussions.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Appreciate it.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.